So for those that are came in early, students that sit at the front of the class, thank you. This is probably our 9th or 10th webinar in the series. We're going to be running them through October into October. We're also planning something special for Cybersecurity Month, which is October. So stay tuned for that. But really appreciate everybody joining today. So I'll get us started. One point before we even get off the title page here, as you see, the title of this webinar, which every one of our webinars is intended to be an educational session, is the importance of GRC platform in building an effective risk and governance strategy. And as Oscar and I were preparing for this particular webinar, we could have just as easily flipped what came first, which is one way to build or to enable the fact that you're building an effective strategy is to actually have a really robust GRC platform. So inside of this conversation that Oscar is going to lead us through, who is our CISO, and I'll introduce him properly, will be, why governance, risk, and compliance is so important, and then how a platform, a robust platform, can actually help simplify or streamline that process. The next slide, Oscar. So when we sit down and kind of look at this at a very high level, you can see the agenda we're going to walk through. I think it's important to really understand the fact that a platform and program needs to have those 5 elements you're seeing on the right. There needs to be as much automation as possible. There needs to be as much transparency as possible. And the ability to make anything efficient means that it's going to get used. Anything that's complicated, anything that's got multiple ways to come in and ways to get out, just human nature is it doesn't get as used as much as you would hope. And the end result of this is to make sure that you understand your risk and compliance strategy and the roadmap that you are fostering from your CISO's direction, your risk manager, your entire team. And one of the things that we also understand is the ability to onboard and offboard clients. Now, what that also means to you as the client would actually be your ability to learn how to use the system. Is it just at the executive dashboard level, or is it an understanding at a high level, or is your role one that you're actually going to be immersed either with hands-on or parallel work with a consultant to make that happen? And the offboarding can also be getting out of that particular platform, but more likely what we see is migrating or crosswalking, which we'll talk about, from one framework to another or melding them. So that's really, what we'll end up incorporating. Oscar, on the next slide. So what we really find overall, and Oscar, you'll hear some more stories as we go, that image of someone spinning a million plates, not letting them fall, is really, truly the job of a CISO. And it's challenging, and it's both challenging and rewarding in many cases, but the ability to sit down and actually deal with all the changes that are happening. And we're seeing things like privacy popping up as what's coming up. We're seeing advancements and changes in frameworks and standards that all have to be adapted. And sometimes they're not bolt-ons, they're adjustments. So kind of revisiting everything on an annual basis and really understanding what's going on and how it's moving. If you don't have that environment to be able to simplify this, it becomes a very challenging position. Oscar, next slide. So as we're going through this conversation, we want to make sure that you both understand the advantages and the pitfalls that are there, to sit down and make sure that you understand what those situations are, to make sure that you're not leaving anything behind, and really be able to sit down and make this as an effective process for you as possible. What we end up seeing on our side as consultants leading customers through this process is if the end customer doesn't see the value, and in this particular case, the value is, are we moving the program forward? Are we going from a letter grade of a D or an F to something like a B or a C, or a C to an A? If you don't see those advancements, it doesn't really matter to the decision makers or to the board, whoever that is, that you've done a lot of the hard work. The result is the end result, excuse me. And that's really where you'll see some screenshots of executive dashboard levels to understand all of the work product and how it bubbles up. So in some cases, we sit down and think top down. In other cases, you're thinking, how do I work with this bottom up? But I think this is something that we'll get across. Next slide, Oscar. And on this slide, if you've been in any of the sessions with us so far, we talk about this layered approach to security, and everything that we do kind of ties back to this view. And not everything is around GRC. What we've highlighted in governance, risk, and compliance are the things that are in green that are directly related. So compliance testing, security policies, data governance, all the stuff that you see there is green. But the CISO is also influencing everything around the security posture. There should be in collaboration with the CTO, separation of kind of church and state between security and technology, but they're obviously blended and have to work together. So in this particular conversation, we're kind of highlighting those items that you see in green. And on the next slide, I believe we're introducing Oscar Jones, who is our CISO. He has been with us for a number of years. We are so fortunate to have him. He leads the team. So anything we have in our consulting team, whether it is our fractional CISOs, risk managers, compliance managers, policy writers, forensic folks, those all work into Oscar, and we're very fortunate to have him here. I will try not to talk about the Cowboys, which I have his hat sitting on the side there. So if we do that, you'll get 20 minutes of Cowboy talk. But Oscar, thank you for helping us today and leading us through this conversation.
Thank you for the intro, Chris. And 20 minutes sounds kind of short for a Cowboys conversation. But no, I understand, and welcome everyone for joining the call. Truly appreciate it. If you have any questions after this, please feel free to reach out to myself or Chris, and we will be more than happy to continue the conversation. All right, so let's talk about GRC, defining governance, risk, and compliance. And we all know the definition of it. What does it actually mean? It's governance, risk, management, compliance, it's a strategy, but what does it really mean for your environment? I think what happens is we talk about these tool sets and how they actually all interconnect with each other. But at the end of the day, it's really about what you're trying to do better for your company. How do they actually start to get compliant across the board? What happens if someone starts to deviate from that compliancy? What occurs when you're at risk and when you're out of compliance? What steps should you take as well, as far as that's concerned? So we're going to talk about the importance in modern organizations, the evolving business landscape. How does it look? Who does it touch? Who does it affect? And we're also going to talk about an overview of it, which means managing that risk through structured frameworks, whether that be NIST or ISO 27001 or SOC, all the various frameworks that we currently have out in the wild that we try to adhere to on a consistent basis. So what are some of the key components, core elements that affect it? This includes policies, procedures, and roles. The thing about policies and procedures, sometimes people get these confused. So policy is a document that stated what procedures should you take in order to maintain your compliance, and what are the roles of individuals that need to be responsible for the decision-making of it and making sure that it actually stays obtainable. A lot of times you'll have a control and you don't have the resources, you don't have the time to actually implement those controls. What steps does GRC help you maintain that process? And we know that there are tons of tools out there, from risk cognizance to know before, to I can give you a list, Logic Gate, just so many out there. But really, you have to pick the tool that's best for you and for your environment, and who's going to run that tool and who's going to actually maintain it, who's going to make sure that the data-driven insights are automated to make your life a little bit easier. We're also going to discuss the compliance tracking features. What happens when somebody takes the wrong step? What happens when someone does something that they know is wrong, but they also are trying to test the parameters of what you set up. So we're also going to go into details about that as well. So what are some of the benefits of implementing a GRC platform? Enhanced decision-making, you consolidate risk data and compliance information. How do you do that? How do you actually make sure that people are making the right decision? And that's by listening and understanding. The one thing that I've learned while being here at CyberSecOps is that if you're having a conversation with your clients, whether that be internal or externally, they will always tell you what they're trying to do next. And as long as you pay attention to some of the curveballs that they may throw at you or some of the deviations that they're thinking about doing, it's going to make your life easier because now you can track the notes of what needs to happen next. So how do you improve it? Adhering to regulatory demands that change, it seems like every week. We deal with this on a consistent basis because, even though there's a framework that looks good, and let's say if you think about, PCI from a perspective of utilizing a GRC platform, 321 had some, significant changes, but then 4.0.1 had other changes that needed to be adhered to. So you always have to continue to be understanding and just tracking changes within frameworks to make sure that your life maintains its sanity. So then you look at the streamlined risk management process. What about the inefficiencies in the risk identification and response? I've worked with customers and clients where they will have over 500,000 issues that have been identified within their risk register. But if you think about that 500,000, 7 of those may be critical. So then that begs the question, which ones do they need to adhere to? Do they need to look at the criticals first, and then the highs, and then the mediums? Again, it comes down to resources, but we always want to look at and try to concentrate on the criticals, at least initially, but those could actually be connected to highs. So if you get rid of the criticals, you actually may be creating a lower and lesser amount of high level risk that you've identified as well within your risk register or in your compliancy. All right, how do you build an effective risk management strategy? Now, we stated this before. You look at all of these frameworks, and we only put a few. We know that there are several more. We didn't even cover the ones that are in other parts of the world. But, NIST and FedRAMP has changed significantly. NIST has changed significantly. CMMC is doing a lot of updating. ISO 27001 and 2, significant changes. We all know about SOC, PCI, CIS, HIPAA controls. It's, if you think about having basically a bowl of, if you stick your hand in the bowl and you pick out a piece of paper, and let's say it's a guessing game, you could actually, a lot of the controls that are with all of these frameworks kind of touch each other. It's really interesting. And if you look at some of the HIPAA controls, if you look at high trust, if you look at SOC, a lot of those can kind of crosswalk to each other because the controls are simply put, all right, you need to do A, B, and C for the next control or risk governance that you're trying to adhere to. But because you can crosswalk those, it makes your life easier when you're trying to now build an effective program across the board for everyone that needs to be involved in the process. But it's going to make it a little bit easier for you as long as you adhere to the controls, the baseline standards. That will make your life a lot easier. Chris and I have conversations about this constantly. How do we make everything easier for our clients? As long as they follow the playbook, as long as they listen to the advice that we're giving them, it'll usually make your life easier. It's usually when you have, someone who wants to go on a different path, it makes your life a lot harder. And then time-centric, and you lose time. And time is the one thing that we really can't control, but we spend it and we need it all the time.
I think one thing to note too, probably 70 to 75% of our clients are need and are running about 2 or 3 frameworks in parallel. That could be because they need to follow HIPAA in addition to NIST, or PCI in addition to NIST. And we also have clients that are trying to get in to provide work with the Department of Defense, so they have to be CMMC certified. So the ability, with this whole crosswalking piece and having the ability to have one platform to sit down and actually feed multiple frameworks, it's very much like if you've got a student that's going to college and they're transferring, that transferring college is making a determination based on from where you're coming, what of those grades and classes am I going to keep? So while you might have a really nice score in one, they might only be taking 50, 60, 70% of what's there, plus this other stuff you have to do anyway. So where we have clients that are like NIST, we have several right now that are NIST, but they want to move into CMMC to get into that sweet spot of Department of Defense. Now they've got to sit down and meet that standard on top of it, but you're able to maintain a watermark. Everyone has to meet this standard, and this is the extra work that division or that group has to meet. So the ability to have your framework and your CISO be able to work in a very efficient manner and be able to control and understand the tasks that they have and that they're assigning out is really critical to making sure that you're meeting the deadlines and expectations that are put forth.
All right, thank you, Chris. So building an effective risk governance strategy. Now, if you look at, our breakdown, and this is from one of our partners, if you look at the scoring, you got the VQ scoring, you got the overall compliance, and this actually takes you into a total compliance. So and you can do 2 to 3 at once. I wouldn't advise that because, time and resources come into play again. And you can also do regulation reviews for your vendor management. If you're looking at a vendor team and they have a high level of risk, and then that's going to put you at risk. We've all seen the stories where a company, is doing great, but then they have a third party vendor that has very relaxed controls, and then they put you at risk. So how do you prevent that? You do that by tracking, by asking them the right questions, by understanding that everything that they do affects you in your own environment. A lot of people forget this part of it because, if you've seen, Blue Cross Blue Shield with Change Healthcare, that was a huge risk for them. It's going to cost them well over $2 billion, not only to correct the issues that were found within that, within Change Healthcare, but also is going to affect them reputationally. And normally when you lose that amount of time and money, customers become wary and clients become wary of doing business with you because they don't think that you have the controls. And I've been telling people this for over 25 years now, that, getting to be compliant is, I wouldn't say it's easy, but, it's a step-by-step process. But if you can become compliant and then lose it, it becomes 10 times harder to obtain it once again. So taking the right steps initially saves you time in the long run. But, it's all about thinking holistically, who is affecting you and how are they affecting you? And this means also going back to look at master services agreement. What controls do they have to have in place in order to maintain being a vendor within your environment? And a lot of times we don't want to have that tough conversation, but it's necessary for us to do so. And this is just some additional, viewpoints of what the tool would look like, how the scoring would look, and also from side to side. And this is basically a true clear-cut walkthrough. You got ISO 27001, CIS version 8, with another CIS version, but that also tells you exactly that you can do this simultaneously, using certain tools that'll make you a lot more comprehensive across the board. Because now you can say, okay, I'm compliant in this, but what controls am I missing in the next level of controls or frameworks that I'm not doing or adhering to? So that way you can control the steps, you can control the information flow, but also make sure that you're understanding that I'm looking great in one specific area, but I can do better in another.
Also, a very effective thing to look at if you're looking at tools, and we have and continue to do evaluations, is to sit down and make sure that your team, both your leadership team as well as the CISO and anybody supports him on that security team, has the ability to have the view that you want to entitle them to see. So leadership might be looking at executive dashboards only, but not being able to sit down and kind of maneuver in or change anything. They can kind of go 1 or 2 clicks deep. The security team should have, as much autonomy as the CISO wants to give each individual person, right? You might have someone that's kind of onboarding that you give minimals to begin with, and then let them come in after 90 days to have more. So this also depicts the multiple views and multiple individuals that are going to be viewing the result of your work if you're the CISO on that team and leading that organization to improve their security posture.
Okay. So this continues the viewpoint of compliance software with 6 tools in one platform. So in the software, how it looks. So you got risk management, crosswalking, my vendors, vendor questionnaires, and the tool is actually very seamless once it's installed and everyone's working on it consistently. It shows your attack surface, your dark web monitoring, what issues have been found. How many auditors do you have currently looking in your environment? What are some of your risk audits? What are your library? And that library would actually be your documentation. So if you look at things like this, it saves you time because you only got to go look at one dashboard. And a lot of times when we are doing frameworks, we either have an Excel spreadsheet or a tool that we're using off to the side. This tool actually makes it a lot easier to just go to one spot, click on something and do research and reviews. It just saves you time in the long run. So it's one of those things that I'm a huge proponent of, because I feel like if I can look at one place and just click on what I need to see, then I don't have to go anywhere else. When you have a lot of pieces of basically a piece of paper or sticky notes all over the place, and you're trying to remember everything that you need to do, this is basically our version of the sticky notes. Okay. Now, crafting a framework for sustainable risk management. So you got to identify your key stakeholders, whether it's being executives, risk management teams, business unit leaders. But this again comes down to resource availability and the size of that team. Now, once you establish that, you got your key stakeholders, the next thing you want to do is make sure you're looking at your risk appetite. What risk are you actually willing to accept? Some companies have no bottom line as far as how many risks they will take, but also how many risks will their partners take, as well as their vendors. If your risk appetite is a little bit higher than most of your vendors, they're going to be a little concerned once they send you the RFI at the end of the year. Sometimes they actually do it twice a year. If your risk level is higher than theirs, they're going to want to have a separate meeting with you to discuss. But how do you do that? Just making sure that your risk level is one of the even keels of how we evaluate ourselves. Do we think we're doing certain things, or do we think we're doing those certain things well? A lot of times we'll tell ourselves, we'll do a self-assessment and we'll always say that we're better than we really are. But when we're compared to industry standards, does it actually hold up? And that's the concern, that whenever you're doing a self-assessment, are you really doing a true view of your environment? So once you do that, once you say, okay, I got a strong, succinct risk appetite, I've got my key stakeholders, now I got to start defining roles and responsibilities. And once I do that, everyone needs to know their job. They need to know exactly what their responsibilities are and what they entail. And are they accountable? And if they do find an issue that kind of pops its head up, are they ensuring that they are letting everyone know what's going on? Here's the risk, but here's how we can actually fix the risk, or can we remediate it or mitigate it as soon as possible? Now, the risk assessment methodologies, qualitative versus quantitative assessment. Qualitative focuses on subjective evaluation and expertise, while quantitative uses statistical methods and numerical data. You can do both, but you just want to make sure that you're doing those in tandem, because one's going to give you a little bit more of an evaluational viewpoint versus looking at statistics and saying, okay, this is how most of us look in the mirror. We're trying to figure out, is this good for us, or is it bad for us, or do we need to lessen this? And I'll give you a perfect example. I was just having a conversation with a customer today about the process in which they use to build applications. It was found out that they currently do not have the ability to segregate the environment. So you could have a development, staging environment, and your production on 3 separate tabs where you can go back and forth. Now, most people would say that is crazy. That is a huge risk. The customer agreed, and so they're actually now in the process of putting together viewpoints that can actually correct that. So we're giving them a list and breakdown of what changes they need to make. They were more than happy to receive that, and then now they're in the implementation process of it. But it does happen where you'll run into a situation where someone is just not taking it as seriously as possible. They're making mistakes, and you know that it's only a matter of time before those mistakes can come back and bite them. So we're trying to figure out, how do we best utilize the information that we're giving them, but also monitoring that to make sure we're all on the same page. Now, risk prioritization techniques, utilizing various techniques such as risk matrix. We've all created them. We've all done heat maps in the past. It saves you time, because now you know where your issues lie. Now we know we got to concentrate on those issues, because we want the heat map to be definitive across the board, but we also want to make sure we're tracking those consistently. And that goes with continuous monitoring and reporting. You can't get away from it. If you're only monitoring every 30 days, every 45 days, or every 2 to 3 months, you're going to miss something most likely, because How do you know that a risk has not increased in size or being driven down through your environment when you're not looking at it on a continual basis? Like, you know, when you're driving your car and you get the check engine light and it may be time for your oil change. How much longer can you drive with the that engine check light on before something catastrophic happens to your vehicle? Same thing with framework, same things with compliance. You got to make sure you're looking at it on a consistent basis to make sure you're not missing something that's already happening in your environment. Integrating GRC with business processes, aligning risk management with organizational objectives. So aligning GRC with organizational goals, extremely important. You know, you can have the best thought process as far as how do we keep this environment safe and secure, but does that also work with your business views? Are the business teams having conversations with you so that you can actually make these changes in their environment? Because a lot of times there's a disconnect between the cybersecurity world and, say, the sales team or what the management team is trying to adhere to. So you got to make sure you're having those regular conversations with the team to ensure that no one's deviating, and you're also building this holistic environment that everyone can thrive in. So you're embedding the risk management in daily operations. Has to be done. It has to be part of the decision-making process. And don't be afraid to say no. You know, if someone's doing something or they're coming to you to ask you specifically about something that they want to do and it doesn't fit into your environment, you can always say no. Now, you may have to justify that no being stated, but at the end of the day, it's going to keep the environment safe. I would rather spend $10 today to make sure that something's working properly than have to spend $20 tomorrow to fix the issue that I didn't even talk about. So now case studies of integration success, you know, examples that successfully integrated GRC, you know, there are several tools out there, like I said, and we can have those conversations with you at any given time to talk about what are some of the benefits of them, but also, you know, how much time is it going to take for you to implement? There are other tools out there that, you know, require API controls. If you don't have anyone who's doing API controls, that can take you a lot of time and effort to actually build it into your environment. And there's some that you can buy off the shelf that'll work fairly well for your environment. It depends and goes back to resource size and level of the individuals that are currently working for you. What are some of the challenges? Navigating roadblocks for successful adoption. This goes to, you know, people don't want to do it. I don't want to do anything new because it's going to cost me too much money and I don't have the time to implement. So you're gonna have this as a problem, you know, resistance to change. Some people have been doing things a certain way. Doesn't mean it's the best way. It just means that they are so used to doing something specifically that they don't want to make any changes. That's going to be a long conversation for you. But data silos and integration issues, insufficient data integration can lead to fragmented insights. If someone's working on something specifically and they don't want to get outside of what they want to do, then they just don't tell anybody. Like, I'm going to work on this and that's all I'm going to do, nothing else. That puts you at risk as well. And maintaining compliance in a dynamic environment. How do you do that? The ever-evolving regulatory landscape presents challenges for compliance because it's always changing. I mean, I looked the other day and I saw 15 new things that I need to worry about next year. And that's on different frameworks throughout the world. Now, here are the conclusion and takeaways. Summary is essential to navigate. GRC framework is one of the things that you're going to have to think about on a consistent basis, but making sure that you're telling the story, right? You don't want to scare anyone to death, but you also don't want people to take it too lightly. So you got to make sure that you're having the right conversations with the right people, having conversations with the CIO, the CEO, to just make sure that everyone's on the same page. And then best practices for risk governance, adhering to best practices such as stakeholder engagement and continuous monitoring is essential because, and everyone's been talking a lot about, you know, AI and AI does have its great points, but you still have to monitor what's being put into the system. You know, so emerging trends such as AI-driven analytics and blockchain for transparency are shaping the future of GRC practices. But again, just make sure you're choosing the right tool. And like I said, we can have those conversations with you to explain exactly what we do, how we do it, and why it's going to be a benefit to you, but also tell you the truth about how long it's going to take to implement those controls as well. So here are some of the key takeaways, and I know we're running on time. enhance compliance, streamline adherence to multiple frameworks, improve decision-making, data-driven insights to true risk posture. Again, you got to have a true view of where you are in order for you to make the right decisions, and safeguarding enterprise value. Proactive risk mitigation protects brand reputation, financial stability, and intellectual property. Because if I'm in your environment and you don't have the right controls, I can take all of that away. And then how long will it take for you to recover? Again, spend $10 a day to not have to spend $20 tomorrow. And operational efficiency, automation reduces manual effort, freeing up security teams for other high-value activities. So, Chris, I will let you take it from here, sir.
Yeah, I think to build on what Oscar made too is we can help you. We have some definitely a preferred tool. We've been looking at tools, have been using them for probably 5 or 6 years. Excel, back in the day. And the thing of having a unified platform, as Oscar's mentioned several times, is probably the ideal situation. Everybody's individual situation might vary. You might be in that check off the box range. You might be one that you've got a significant organization, regardless of size, that you need the interoperability of all these things. But the best thing that you do in the very beginning going to be benchmarking where you are with some kind of an assessment, and you need that platform to load the data in to be your starting point, to be able to understand where are we right now with all the work that we've done.
Oh, we may have lost Chris, but this is really, oh, he's back. But this is really just, to continue the conversation with Chris, it was about how we can help you make the best decision. So if anyone, sends any information for additional data, we'll be more than happy to cover that for you and have that conversation with you. I know we lost you, Chris, but here's what's up next. January 26th at 1 p.m. Beyond Gartner, choosing your security stack, and then the 10th, security awareness training, best practices and strategies, and then July 23rd, building a cyber resiliency, governance, and compliance. I want to say thanks everyone for joining the call. Truly appreciate it. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out to us as soon as possible, and we'd be more than happy to set up that time and have the conversation with you.
We will send out a recording of this. I did get cut off for a second. We'll send out a recording of this with the slides themselves. And like on a previous slide, if you'd like to get in touch with us, that information will be there and we can help understand where you are. If you're just looking for a tool, if you're looking for a tool and a partner to sit down and actually help you figure out your security program and help you with guidance on how that would work, we're available to do all of that. So Oscar, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you for everybody for your attention. Have a great weekend.